Our coalition, established in 2019, is a leading platform that brings together private sector leaders to drive social and economic impact, especially for displaced communities. It connects refugees and displaced youth to jobs, education, entrepreneurship opportunities, while helping businesses benefit from Africa's growing workforce potential. Today, Isaac joins us to discuss the coalition impact and mission and to explain what brings Amahoro Coalition back in Kigali. Welcome, Isaac. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we're going to discuss on the coalition mission and the impact it is bringing to the world. Also, to explain what brings Amahoro Coalition back to Kigali this year. With our first question, what brings Amahoro Coalition back to Kigali?
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me today, and it's a pleasure to be back in Kigali. Why are we back here? We love Kigali. That's why we come back. Increasingly, I think if you're an African, Rwanda is turned out to be one of the most interesting spaces for you to come and convene and talk about Africa's, not just the future, but the present, what is happening on the continent, but also to look and aspire for the Africa that we want. And I think this country's history and the events that are held here, and increasingly the very impressive high-level convenings that happen here, are what brings us here every single year. But on a more practical note, we're here because of one thing. We're here for jobs. We engage with private sector actors all the time. The Africa CEO Forum is happening this once again in Kigali. And we believe it's important to be around captains of industry, business leaders, and also to a certain extent, policymakers who intervene in jobs and labor to talk about essentially how do we create a much more productive workforce in Africa, but also an inclusive workforce in Africa. We, at Amahoro Coalition, our main mandate is working with folks, young people from displaced backgrounds. And it's about time that the issues of displacement becomes ubiquitous and almost synonymous with prosperity standpoints. But anyway, but that's what we're here. We're here to have partnerships, have conversations, spark interest, and also just engage with people about the thing that we're doing.
Excellent. This leads us to our next question. The theme for the session that you're hosting today, it is where does business and talent go when people move? So what is the answer to that question, Isaac?
It's a simple answer. I mean, when people move, the talent doesn't disappear, right? What I say to people, what's between your ears, what God gave between your ears with your brain and talent you have, you take that with you everywhere. And we're seeing that increasingly. I think that, one of the things that we haven't capitalized on the continent is that, we talk about this brain drain. There was a long time when the brain drain was almost sort of voluntarily. So I want to leave my country to go somewhere because of greener pastures, what have you. But when it comes to displacement, you have Africans who are being displaced for no reason of their own. We're extremely talented. And somehow we're not always capturing that talent set, right? And we're seeing that. I think, again, you asked me why I came to Rwanda. I think Rwanda serves as a good example of that. We're seeing that in real life. We're seeing that with the Al Hilal football team from Sudan. They first moved to, 2023, conflict starts in Sudan. They go to Mauritania. They win the championship. They come to Rwanda. They win the championship again yesterday. And what that says is something very profound, right? Is that, when talent is together, them being in Rwanda, even as a team, what sports does to people in terms of upliftment, in terms of energy, in terms of jobs, in terms of creativity, they add to the fabric of the creative fabric of Rwanda. And I think that's what we want to encourage, to make sure that, when people move, they move their talents. And if we're really going to talk about an Africa we want, and Agenda 2063, an inclusive Africa, you have to have a continent where everyone is included. And especially when you're 45 million Africans who are displaced, want a part of that inclusivity. Part of our job is to bring that conversation to bear.
Mm-hmm. This is really interesting, as we have Africa with the really highest number of youth nowadays. So it's really worth the effort to invest in the youth. So to our third question, you have addressed private sector leaders here in Kigali 2 years ago. What is your message to the private sector this year?
The message is simple: is that we need to act now. The idea of economic inclusion is no longer a buzzword. It's a market strategic impetus for businesses. I tell people, you have today in Kigali, you have hundreds and hundreds of African CEOs here. They flew in. These are captains of industry. They expanded markets. But the interesting part of that conversation is that the market they're talking about includes these 45 million Africans who are displaced. And so it's not a question of inclusion. It's a question of strategy, right? Last time I was here, I challenged companies to contribute about 1 or 2% of their whether revenue or jobs to people who are displaced. But I think we need to do more than that. We need to do more than that, because if you're a company in Kenya you want to expand across East Africa, first of all, you need a stable East Africa. And second of all, you need a population set that can buy your product. And third of all, you need managers and people who have the skill sets to actually do the work you're offering them to do. And so it's incumbent on business leaders to make sure that we're creating a continent where and a population set that are able to take on these jobs. And I think that the message we're bringing back here is that, it's no longer an option for us to be inclusive. It's not CSR. It's not, it's not nice to have. It's really something that companies have to understand, that the mobility realities that affect our continent is really going to be what drives our continent's GDP. And we need to be more inclusive on that.
Excellent. Kigali hosted the inaugural Africa Forum on Displacement in 2021. What has happened since then?
First of all, let me acknowledge a few things. Look, 2021, you asked me a while ago why we come to Kigali. 2021, Rwanda took a bet on us. It was during COVID. COVID was happening. I think as we're having the event, we still had curfews. We were not able to go out. I believe that our event was one of the first events during COVID that the government allowed to happen here. And I think we're very grateful and very thankful that it happened, because what happened is that I believe the day before we showed up here, Omicron happened, and people couldn't move around anymore. And it was a blessing because people showed up to Rwanda. Over 200 CEOs showed up to Rwanda in 2021 to have this conversation. And it was an experiment. And I think we were very honored to have the Prime Minister there. We had the Deputy High Commissioner for UNHCR. We had the CEO of Akia Foundation joined by Zoom. And people showed up. And I think since then it was an idea. It was an idea of, can we do this? It was a beautiful idea. Africans we have good ideas. So we had this idea, like, what do you do with this idea? Since then, I can tell you that we've gone to Accra. I went to Accra in 2023, went Nairobi in 2025, in April 2025. And this year we're going to Addis Ababa in November 2026. And the reason is that this is a fourth AFD, this is a fourth forum on displacement. And we want to keep moving the needle, right? So the first year there was some conversation we had, second year commitments were made, third year commitments were entrenched, I'll say. Big partnerships were established. And the idea now is, let's go talk about how do we really build this ecosystem, not in a conversational, theoretical way, but how do we apply some of the learnings that we have, but also some of the real engagements and successes and impacts we've had in the space, and bring others along with us. So this actually is a good opportunity for me to invite, if you're a CEO, if you are a private sector actor, or anyone who cares about this conversation, would love to have you in Addis Ababa in November 15th to 18th. That's when the event is. And we're going to have a really interesting conversation about scaling our efforts, but also understanding that, there's a history of displacement in Africa when it comes to leadership. I tell people that the forebearers of our independence, a lot of them were displaced for a long time, right? Because they couldn't be at home. If you look at the struggle of South Africa, look at the struggle of every country, the struggle of this country. You have to leave your country to go somewhere else. Now, that was what I call political displacement, right? So whether it was a president of Rwanda, President Kagame, whether it was President Kwame Nkrumah back in the day, whichever year it was, these leaders had to be somewhere else and work their way back into their country. Well, you know what? They've done their part. The governments have done their part. Policy have done their part. Now private sector actors have to do their part. So in my mind, the fourth edition of this conversation, or what I call the fourth revolution in quotes, is that private sector actors have to take the mantle now and now take that displacement conversation to build a much more prosperous Africa. Governments can do that for us. Governments create an enabling environment, and our job is to create the jobs and to hire people. So I think that in Addis Ababa this November, we're going to have these conversations, and also at the core of it, have young people in the conversation. Make sure that we have a lot of young people there, because these young leaders are not leaders of tomorrow, they're leaders of today. And they have to be in the conversation. And so I think everything we're going to be doing, everything we started in 2021 has been a progression of where we're going to end up in 2026 in Addis Ababa. And who knows what happens after 2026, the fifth edition, where we're going to be. We may come back here. So I think, we're excited. It was a great first event, and we've kept the momentum going. And we're very, very, and as I said earlier, we're very privileged and very thankful that this country took a bet on us during COVID, when, it was tough to do events anywhere on the continent, actually anywhere in the world, much less the continent.
Yeah, definitely. Having been able to maintain your goal, to be able to conduct those meetings here in Kigali in those tough moments, what do you think are the lessons that you've drawn from those moments, and do you think are going to help you with the sustainability with all you're building right now? Because we can see in the world many things are really going on. What are some forms of sustainability that you bring, or measures that you've started on that will help you, staying firm on what you're working on right now?
Absolutely. Look, I think the first thing is that partnerships matter. Actually, before that, I think the first thing that you have to believe in what you want to do, right? I think the belief has to be there. And I think, like I said, we were lucky for others to take some bets on us, whether it was the government of Rwanda, whether it was the UNHCR, other organizations we're working with. But I think the first thing I'll say that one of the first lessons is that you have to make sure that if you believe in something firm enough, that others buy into it. And I think partnerships have become a very big thing for us. We've been very, very fortunate to have great partnerships with our co-conveners, Inkomoko, that is based here, with the MasterCard Foundation, with UNHCR, that have been partners since this event started. But beyond the partnerships, I think what's also been very gratifying and very enduring is that it's not just partnerships for a forum, it's partnership for engagement. So even after the forum, as companies and individuals make commitments, we are working together to make sure that we are actualizing those commitments. So it's not just a talk shop. So, I can tell you that, since 2019, we've had, just a Mahoro, I'm sure our partners have had more. We've had over 300,000 jobs and commitments from private sector. Went from zero at the time. And it was zero, not because private sector didn't care, it was zero because private sector wasn't engaging in this conversation. And the number is growing. I think together with our partners, the other partners I mentioned, we've mobilized close to over $200 million into the ecosystem. And this is money that's been brought into the refugee ecosystem as a result of the convenience we're having. And I think those are good things that is happening. And I think that once we do that, and also look, we have this amazing fellowship program where we have an average fellow is creating about 48 jobs, right? And these opportunities that they're getting now as a result of these partnerships that we have. So I think partnerships is a good thing. But I think the other lesson is sort of the discipline to make sure that you are staying firm and consistent. Because sustainability is two things, right? It's sort of how do you stay sustainable in terms of your financial sustainability, but also sustainability and impact. So you're not just counting beans, as I call it, right? Not just counting outcomes, you're counting impact. And I think being able to make sure that we are deepening our impact and understanding that what we're doing, the seriousness of what we're doing, and bring everyone along, but more importantly, allowing the people who know how to do this best, which are the leaders in community, do their job. I tell people at the Mahoro Coalition that we're not here to empower anybody. Our job is to amplify what somebody is doing already. And one of the biggest lessons for us is being humble enough to say that, look, all we're doing is just opening an aperture for someone and also working their journey with them, but trusting the people who are doing this to do their job well and to do what they need to do. And I think that's been the biggest lesson for us. And finally, in terms of financial sustainability, trusting partners to come on board and work with us, but also ourselves and our partners finding different ways to engage, because the development world is getting very difficult in terms of funding. So finding more creative ways to do more with less, finding more creative ways to cut costs instead of get money, right? More operational discipline. I think those are the kinds of things that we're doing to also make sure that we remain relevant and also sustainable over time.
Mm-hmm. Those are really great lessons and strategies being put into place. In a world facing conflict and displacement, climate pressures, and economic shocks, what gives you hope for the future?
What gives me hope for the future? Plenty of things give me hope. I think, look, we make a lot of fuss about this thing of migration, right? And there's a conversation about people are migrating across the Mediterranean, and it's horrible, and people are losing their lives, and that's a very bad thing. But one of the things that's interesting to me is that, do you know that over 90%, I forget what the percentage is, a very large percentage, I think over 90% of people, Africans who are displaced actually are in Africa. That's first. The second thing is that we also have a continent that is so diverse. The Africa of today, it doesn't look like just you and I. We are from all over the place. We have Africans who look very different. We have Africans with different colors. And increasingly, because of displacement, we have Africans by the country. In your country, you have Afghans living here in Rwanda. You have people from Sudan living here and in Rwanda. And I think there's an amazing thing that is happening in the African continent in terms of the diversity of talent and diversity of people who are just doing their part to make sure this continent realizes its own dreams. And I think it's high time that we understood that this continent is also the continent of dreams, not just a continent of, there's hope in the future, but people realize their dreams here. There's a Sudanese medical school here, I believe, right? That's someone realizing a dream. In other countries, I'm sure in Kenya, I'm sure in Uganda, I'm sure in Ghana, wherever, there are people who've moved there, who've contributed tremendously. And the young people doing amazing things. So we have a young person, Amos, who is doing, he's one of our fellows. He has a juice business doing pineapple and ginger juice. We have Espora, who is he has agribusiness in the Mombashi. We have eBay Nigeria, who is doing a recycling company with 600 employees. I can go on and on and on and on and on. That's what gives me hope. And I think that a lot of times we tend to focus on the glass half empty, as opposed to the glass being half full, right? There's so many problems in Africa, like everywhere else. The problems are there. If you look for them, you find them. But I think at the end of the day, we have to focus on what is working, the positives, what is making people's lives better, and focus on that. And as I say, over time, the light will shine brighter and brighter and brighter that the dark side of it will slowly start diminishing. I think for me, that's what gives me hope every day.
Thank you so much, Isaac. I feel so inspired. The future of Africa is really shining, and I'm so hopeful for what is to come. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thanks.